these slides are going to go really quickly.
Okay.
All right, most of what I'm going to say I've written many times before, most comprehensively in my latest book, Walking Away from Empire. If you want a copy of the page proofs of that book, just go to guymcpherson.com, that's Nature Bats Last. Find my contact information, send me an email message, and I'll send you free a copy of the page proofs. Today I have some good news, I have some really horrible news, and I have some really astonishingly good news. I'm going to present them in that order. Try not to focus too much on the bad news, because I'll be focusing on it obsessively.
Guy, can you tilt? Yeah, thanks.
Get a little closer to the mic.
I'm going to do this.
Woo!
Next slide, please. The good news is this set of living arrangements is nearly done. In the not too distant future, we'll have no water coming out of the municipal taps, no food at the grocery store, no fuel at the filling station, no lights on here in the Empire. According to these 80 people, that'll happen by the end of this year. Now, some of these people have been wrong. Some of them have been wrong many times. Some of them haven't been wrong yet, but I bet they will be, because we only got 2 months to go. So it wouldn't surprise me if a long decline will end with a sudden and cataclysmic collapse of the world's industrial economy, which has been declining since 1999 or 2000, depending on which metric you use. So for a dozen years or so, we've been in decline of the industrial economy. If you think that can't happen quickly, that an empire can't fall relatively quickly, think about the events of the late 1980s and early 1990s. The last superpower didn't take a dozen years to fall. Next slide. This is good news because if we stop this omnicidal, suicidal set of living arrangements that we call industrial civilization, then that will actually force us to stop climate chaos, which threatens us with near-term extinction. It will force us to stop human population overshoot, which proceeds currently at the rate of more than 200,000 individuals per day added to the planet. That's births minus deaths. 200,000 people per day brought into the world that they didn't choose to be brought into. It's not like we vote for that. We just appear here. Nobody chose this time in history. And we don't have food for those people. We don't have clean water. We don't have clean air for all those people we're adding every day. And there's 7 billion plus of us now. At what point do we stop the madness on an overpopulated planet? When the industrial economy collapses, and I'm not saying that it will happen this year or next year, but it will happen. This set of living arrangements will come to an end. All civilizations fall, including industrial civilization. When that happens, we'll be forced to slow or stop the 6th great extinction, which is proceeding apace at 200 species a day. Every single life-destroying day. 200 species a day. That's genocide. That's what the industrial economy allows us and apparently forces us to do. 200 species a day, as if we have the right. And finally, termination of this set of living arrangements will force us to stop environmental decay. And here I'm thinking about every part of the world that has become worse every year of my 52 years on the planet. Everybody I know thinks every year has been better than the year before because we've got iPads and Kindles, right? But from my perspective, every year has been worse than the year before. Every year we have more soil that we wash into the world's oceans. Every year we foul more air and dirty more water. Every year we destroy every aspect of the living planet that we actually need to survive. And we think it's cool because we have smartphones. Let's make the right trade. And here comes the bad news. And most people stop right here, by the way. Most people stop with Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change with their 5-year-old assessment of 1 degree C in 88 years. And we know so much more than that now. For a couple of reasons, we have an abundance of data. We're collecting climate data on an enormous level. And the models are so much better than they were 5 years ago. You probably know Moore's law and the rapidity with which computational speed is increasing. So We know better than this, yet most people stop right here. By the way, 1 degree C is catastrophic. We've been convinced by a neoclassical economist of all things that 2 degrees C is something we should worry about. William Nordhaus somehow hijacked the conversation and said 2 degrees C is something to be worried about, 1 degree is no big deal. Next slide. 1 degree is a big deal, as we've known for more than 20 years. 1 degree C temperature increase leads to rapid, unpredictable, and non-linear responses that could, will, and have lead to extensive ecosystem damage. We've known this for over 20 years. This is one of the greatest cover-ups by the corporate media I've ever heard about. Next. Hadley Center for Meteorological Research, hardly a left-wing organization, comes out a year after the IPCC with more computational power and more data, and concludes that we're headed to a 2 degrees C warmer world by the end of the century. Next. And 2 degrees is truly catastrophic. 2 degrees, because of positive feedbacks or self-reinforcing feedback loops, leads almost immediately and with great certainty to 6 degrees C. And the last time it was 6 C warmer on this planet than baseline, there were snakes the size of yellow school buses living in the Amazon, and the largest mammal on the planet was the size of a shrew. So that's the largest mammal that can thermoregulate that kind of wet bulb temperature. This is huge, and nobody talks about it. President Obama expressed considerable surprise at an interview earlier this week that climate change didn't come up during the debates. Really? The scripted debates that you approved every damn question, climate change didn't come up? I'm shocked. We don't talk about this. It's too scary. Next. United Nations Environment Program, 6 months after the Hadley Center's assessment. The Hadley Center, let me tell you how left-wing they are. They were established by Margaret Thatcher. Some of us know. Many of you are too young to know. United Nations Environment Program comes along mid-2009, says we're headed for a 3.5 degrees C warmer world by 2100 next. I'm halfway through these assessments, by the way. Hadley Center comes along just a year after their most recent assessment, says 4 is the new 2, and it's coming by mid-century. Remember, 2 leads to 6. 4 is the last nail in the coffin of the human experience. Next. Consistent with that assessment, the Global Carbon Project and the Copenhagen diagnosis, at the time of the Copenhagen climate change meetings that the Obama administration threw under the bus, came up with 6 and 7 degrees C warming by the end of the century. Next. International Energy Agency, with their World Energy Outlook that they produce every year the day after Thanksgiving. Gee, nobody notices then. Probably a coinkydink, I don't know. IEA says in November of 2010 that we're headed to 3.5 degrees C warmer world by 2035. That's a big deal. By 2030, that's not very long from now if I'm doing the math right. Next. United Nations Environment Program, December of 2010 says more than 5 degrees C by 2050. More than 5 degrees C kills the oceans. The ocean becomes so acidified that essentially nothing can live there, including the thermophiles found at incredible depths at enormous temperatures. Phytoplankton in the ocean produce half our oxygen, by the way. I think we're going to have a hard time getting along without that. Next. It's almost as if we might experience rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses that could lead to extensive ecosystem damage. Stop me if you've heard that one before. Next. Next. And finally, the International Energy Agency, just a year after their previous assessment, comes up with 6 degrees C by 2035. Wow! Less than 6 months later, next slide, they either capitulated or clarified what they were trying to say. And they said, no, 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 we didn't mean by 2035. Even though you can find the press release online, that's exactly what it says. They said, we meant 2100. Huh. Curious. Next. The good news is that none of these assessments include economic collapse. The bad news, and you knew it was coming, next, is that none of them include positive feedbacks. Self-reinforcing feedback loops. None. These all assume simple linear projections from one year to the next, from one decade to the next. Let's talk about those positive feedback loops next. The only major assessment that I know about was conducted more than a year ago, so it's ancient history at this point, by the National Center for Atmospheric Research. They conclude we're headed for 16.5 degrees C increase by 2100. It's kind of a big deal. Next, and climate scientist Paul Beckwith at the University of Ottawa, at the middle of last month, pointed out that we could observe a 6 degrees C temperature increase within a decade because of positive feedbacks. It's almost as if, stop me if you've heard this one, next. We could experience rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses that could lead to extensive ecosystem damage. I think that's about right. We've known this for 22 years. Next. Just when you think it can't get any worse, I have another slide. According to the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, one of the premier science journals in the entire world, in a paper published in February 2009, so a long time ago now, climate change is irreversible. What the paper actually found was that the atmospheric level of carbon dioxide today is the minimum level we will observe for at least the next 1,000 years. So we're at an average carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere right now of 396 parts per million. And we will be at 396 parts per million for at least the next 1,000 years. That's the minimum. 350.org is a bad joke. It's disingenuous or ignorant. There is no way we'll see 350.org, 350 parts per million CO2 within at least the next 1,000 years. Promoting that as if we could get there is ridiculous. Next. United Nations Environment Program, during 2008, the most catastrophic year of the catastrophic Great Recession. We can't call them depressions anymore because that's too depressing. So we call them recessions now, big ones, Great Recessions. Great, that was great for me, was it good for you?
Very recessing.
During 2008, global carbon emissions increased to their highest level since we fully implemented the Clean Air Act in this country. But that was nothing compared to what was coming. 2009, we increased over that record-setting year by 6.2%. 2010, we increased over that record-setting year by 6.5%. 2011, we increased over that record-setting year by 3.4%. We're in an economic Great Depression, and carbon emissions keep going up. We can't just slow the industrial economy. Instead, only economic collapse will prevent runaway climate change. There's an amazing story behind this paper. Tim Garrett from the University of Utah submitted this paper to 10 journals before he could find one that would publish it. And then it was published in Climatic Change, one of the premier journals in climate sciences. He submitted it there in 2007. It was accepted and printed online in November of 2009, and there was immediately a big outcry from the scientific community, who said, no, we can't stop this set of living arrangements. That would be bad. So before it was published, it was held back for nearly 2 years so that people could write responses. So there are 2 responses to this article to which Garrett was not allowed to respond that were published at the same time as the print version of his paper. This is politics severely interfering with science, in my opinion. It sort of reminds me, when I go on speaking tours, I sometimes ask the host, if I'm speaking at a high school or for younger students, I ask if I should maybe not talk about economic collapse, because some people find that depressing, oddly. Remember, that's my good news. And I was speaking in New York last year, and I wrote to the science coordinator at the school where I was going to be speaking, and I said, so a lot of times people don't want me to talk about economic collapse to high school students, so I won't talk about that if that's okay. And she said, yeah, that would be bad. We don't want to upset the kids. I said, okay, tongue in cheek. I'm just kidding. I said, how about if I talk about, 3 paths to near-term human extinction? She says, that'd be great. If Plato could only see. A a paper in Bioscience earlier this year, a prestigious academic journal. Researchers went and translated Thoreau's extensive notes from the 1840s, a series of years in the 1840s, right before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Most people peg that at 1850. So Thoreau was out there around Concord, Massachusetts, collecting extensive information on the first flowering dates of all the plants in the area. He was quite the naturalist. And somebody went through and transcribed all those notes, which were essentially unreadable, because apparently his handwriting was even worse than mine. And they transcribed all those and figured out the first flowering dates of all the plants in the area around Concord, Massachusetts. And then they went out in the late 2000s, so between 2005 and the following few years, and collected the same information. And what they found was, if we believe the plants instead of the sensors, the area around Concord, Massachusetts is actually warmed by about 2.4 degrees centigrade. The sensors all indicate that that area has warmed by 1 degree. I'm more inclined to believe the plants than our instruments. If we believe the plants, we're already at 2 degrees C. And I suspect that's why we're seeing numerous positive feedbacks, 6 of which I know we've triggered. First 5 of which lead to near-term human extinction. Next. So I want to talk about those feedbacks briefly. All these were reported relatively recently. The scientific community is unbelievably conservative. That's why most scientists are still using the IPCC's 4th assessment, 5 years old, and waiting for the next assessment, which is due out in 2 years, to base their next projections on. Based on data from the summer of 2010, this paper appeared in January 2011 in Science and pointed out that the Arctic is defrosting because warm Atlantic water is shooting up through the Fram Strait off the north and east coasts of Greenland directly into the Arctic Sea. So we have warm Atlantic water that previously always reversed course at Greenland as part of the thermohaline conveyor belt. And instead of reversing course, now it's just shooting straight up through the Fram Strait off the north and east coast of Greenland, taking warm Atlantic water into the Arctic. First time that's been reported in recorded history was 2010, a signature year for climate studies. I suspect we're going to see an ice-free Arctic within the next 3 years. If so, it'll be the first time for 3 million years, before there were human beings on the planet, in other words. It'll be the first time in 3 million years there'll be an ice-free Arctic. We're on path for that to happen in 2014 or 2015. From various other sources, the first 4 of these are peer-reviewed science papers. We have 5 other positive feedbacks. Any one of which, again, leads to the direction we don't want to go. The first of those is peat in the world's boreal forests, which is decomposing very rapidly. As the water table falls, peat is exposed to the air. It decomposes and becomes carbon in the atmosphere almost immediately, contributing to warming and drying of the atmosphere, which causes the water table to decline, which exposes more peat to the air, which causes it to decompose, which causes warming and drying. So that's a classic positive feedback. In Siberia, on the ground, the permafrost is melting so rapidly that methane is being vented from the ground. So you can see this stuff on YouTube. In 2010, again, a signature year for climate studies, 2010 researchers would go out to Siberia and they'd find these vents, and they were about 30 centimeters in diameter, about 1 foot across, and they would light them on fire, because this is what scientists do. They play with fire. I know, I was a scientist for a long time. I know it's really thrilling stuff. Look, Mom, and there's a big Roman candle, right? Really cool. That was 2010. 2011, those methane events were 1 kilometer across. Next. It's almost as if, stop me if I've heard this before, there will be rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses. 3 orders of magnitude increase in the size of those vents in 1 year. That's rapid. That's unpredictable. That's amazing. Next. At the same time, We can light Siberia on fire. Methane is also escaping from the world's oceans, and particularly in the Arctic. There are methane hydrates or clathrates. Those are synonyms, little cages of methane that are floating up to the surface as the ocean warms, and then the methane is being released into the atmosphere. Methane is about 100 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide in the short term, 20 to 30 times more powerful molecule for molecule than carbon dioxide in the long term, over 100 years or so, but we don't have 100 years. 2011, someplace in the Arctic, it looked like ginger ale because the methane was bubbling out so quickly. Next. And then again from 2010, a drought in the Amazon that was so profound that just as a result of natural decomposition, natural drying, natural decomposition of the Amazon forest, which is supposed to be a net sequesterer of carbon, instead, decomposition was proceeding so quickly that the Amazon basin released more carbon than all the cars, trucks, and coal-fired power plants in the United States combined in 2010. It's supposed to be the lungs of the planet, and they're giving up all that carbon dioxide. In 2010, producing more carbon into the atmosphere than the entire United States. We're number one. And then the most recent, the one that's not reported in the refereed journal literature and won't be for 15 years, because it's such a slow process, is drilling in the Arctic. And so the more there's open water, the more it allows us to go up there and drill for oil and gas. And then we burn it, and that makes the water more open. You know where this goes next. The Arctic Methane Emergency Group looks at one of those positive feedbacks, methane, in one region in the Arctic, and concludes that in 2010, not surprisingly, it appears that methane has gone exponential. That's 2010 right there on the right-hand side with the red dots going straight up. Next. And the author is Malcolm Light. This came out February of this year, and Malcolm Light predicts extinction by mid-century. And I'm going to read here, because that's what I do. Methane release will accelerate exponentially. He reports that it has accelerated exponentially. Release huge quantities of methane into the atmosphere and lead to the demise of all life on Earth before the middle of this century. He pegged it to, for the northern hemisphere, to 2031.6. I left off the decimal place. He's a scientist. September. Look for that in September in the northern hemisphere. And 2047.8 in the southern hemisphere. All life on Earth. And I thought that was hyperbolic when I first read it, because I thought, thermophiles? How are you going to kill thermophiles? Methane-eating bacteria? But then I thought about, well, you know, next. That there would be rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses that could lead to extensive ecosystem damage. And so, yeah, it might kill everything. It certainly is the end of the line for the human experience when we get to those kinds of conditions. Next. At this point, I would like you to breathe. I put that in there just to remind me. Just tell everybody to breathe and act like it's going to be okay. Even though obviously it's not. We can tell ourselves little lies. I didn't eat ice cream for lunch. Okay, so now what? What do we do in the face of this information? Most people I know will just run from it, right? Will pretend that this never happened. So I went and had an affair, and I'm going to deny that it ever, so you'll deny that you ever knew me. Guy who? No, never heard of him. Next. So what I suggest we do is to channel little Springsteen. In the end, what you don't surrender, well, the world just strips away. So let go. Next. Let go, or be dragged. Seize the day. Or, to quote my own personal hero, live as though the day were here. I'm over being judgmental about the way people live. I think we don't have a long time left on this planet. And if you're living in the interior of a large continent in the northern hemisphere, you are truly, totally it's in trouble. Live as though the day were here. Now I have the really good news. It'll have to be really good, won't it? I mean, the bar here has got to be high, right?
Yeah.
I can't believe you're all still here. And I'm still alive. This is stunning on 2 counts already. We're amazing. You're amazing. We're all of it. I'm not doing the Tony Robbins thing here. Okay. We really are amazing. You get to die. You get to die. And that makes you the lucky one. The lucky ones. Because you got to live. You know what the odds are? You know what we know from DNA, from our knowledge of DNA? You know what the odds are against any one of us being here? They're astronomical. Think about plucking a single grain of sand from all the world's beaches. That doesn't come close. The odds against any one of us being here are greater than the odds against plucking a single atom from our entire universe. And yet, here you are. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I that are privileged to be here, privileged with eyes to see where we are and brains to wonder why. And now you're thinking, why? Why did I come here? Why? No, I mean why in the greater sense. But just why today? What underlies the Armageddon we have triggered? And it is Armageddon. You can't call 200 species a day merely an extinction crisis. It's Armageddon. We have triggered Armageddon. We've been pursuing it for quite a long time. What underlies it is our drive to consume. The way we live, particularly in this country, like this, suburbia, not quite city, not quite country, requires us to live far from where we work, far from where we play, far from where we shop for all the things we think we need with the money we don't have. Forces us to consume. What underlies the industrial economy of the United States? 70% of it is underlain by personal consumption. In the wake of 9/11, how do we get out of that mess? Go to the mall. That's what your president said. Go to the mall. Got to consume our way back on track to greatness. Consume. Consume, to do away with completely. Destroy, to spend wastefully, to squander. It's almost biblical, really, to waste or burn away, to perish. And this is a good thing? This is the best they can tell us, is to consume? Next. To maintain this set of living arrangements requires obedience at home, oppression abroad, and whole-scale destruction of the living planet on which we depend for our actual lives. Just think about oppression abroad, for example. Anybody gets in the way of our oil, we kill them. It's that simple. That's the Carter Doctrine. The last decent man in the Oval Office, Jimmy Carter, comes up with the doctrine that says, with respect to the Middle East, that's our oil over there. Jimmy Carter, the Marcus Aurelius of his day, knew what it took to maintain an empire in decline. Obedience at home? Well, that panel is from Alabama, when, in the wake of the great financial crisis in September 2008, citizens were legally protesting illegal actions by local banks, and in response, the National Guard was illegally brought in to quash the protests. That's just a minor example of obedience at home. If you want more, look to the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act 2012, signed in the dark of night on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2011, in which, for the first time since passage of the Magna Carta in 1215, we suspend habeas corpus in peacetime. And nobody says a thing. That's the astonishing part of this. We suspend habeas corpus in the civilized world for the first time since passage of the Magna Carta, and nobody says a word. Well, Chris Hedges and a couple other guys sue, and they win in court, and the Obama administration ignores that. Here's another example of obedience at home. In 2000, when George W. Bush was running for president of the United States, he would speak on college campuses, and occasionally a lone student would stand up and express his or her First Amendment rights, freedom of expression, turn his or her back on the future President of the United States and stand in silent protest. Other students would notice they'd stand up and turn their back too. And in some places, a third or a half of the students, by the time George W. Bush was done speaking, had their backs turned to him. It was massively underreported, but it happened all over the country. That's the year 2000. Fast forward 10 years, 1 decade, Hillary Clinton is speaking in Washington, D.C., and a well-known man in Washington, D.C. stands up and in silent protest turns his back on the Secretary of State. Ray McGovern, 71 years old, former CIA analyst, prepared the daily intelligence briefing for 4 United States presidents. I think probably people knew who he was that day in Washington, D.C. He stands up, he's 71 years old, he stands up and in expressing his First Amendment rights, turns on the Secretary of State silently, and they beat him bloody and threw him in jail. Obedience is not allowed. Resistance is futile. Not in this country, not anymore. It's amazing to me. I came of age in a time of resistance in this country. Now I hardly recognize the country I grew up in. The trouble is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you've seen it, keeping quiet, saying nothing becomes as political an act as speaking out. There's no innocence. Either way, you're accountable. Unfortunately, I saw it. And I couldn't unsee it. So I walked away. I had a job for life. I was a tenured full professor and I won all the awards and all that crap. I was actually banned from teaching in my home department for the last several years I was there. I was asking students to think, to question the dominant paradigm. So I was teaching poetry in prisons. So I was paid to not show up. Can you imagine? Paid to not show up, a job for life. But I couldn't live at the apex of empire and point out the dark underbelly of the industrial economy and look myself in the mirror. You just can't do that for an extended period of time. I couldn't unsee it. So, now what? Now what for me is walking away from empire. I live decidedly outside mainstream culture in agrarian anarchy. Anarchy is not chaos, by the way. Chaos is an absence of rules. Anarchy is an absence of rulers. In anarchy, you take responsibility for yourself and for your neighbors. I used anarchy in my classrooms for 15 years at the University of Arizona. Where I live now, people take responsibility for their neighbors, human and otherwise. That's anarchy. I live at the edge of empire, still in the empire, because there's no escape. Off the grid, in a straw bale house I refer to as the mud hut, promoting a gift economy and living a gift economy. Your mileage might vary. So, I don't know what this means for you. Near-term collapse of the set of living arrangements we call industrial civilization. Near-term human extinction. I don't know what that means for you. I barely know what it means for me. I had to act in a way that matched my moral imperative. I recognize that that's almost impossible. Which reminds me of a line from The Princess Bride, as most things do. Greatest movie ever made. You remember when he was almost dead? And they took him to Billy Crystal? And Billy Crystal says, well, he's almost dead. And there's a big difference between dead and almost dead. So responding to this existential crisis we face is almost impossible. It's paralyzing, it's debilitating. But it's not quite impossible. So I want you to keep that in mind. If you want more of this, and who wouldn't? You can follow my writing at naturebats.McPherson.com, and I write a monthly essay at Transition Voice as well. And I want to thank everybody for being here, and thanks especially to Justin and his wife Amanda for putting up with me for the next few days in their house. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments.
answer this. But do you think, in light of that storm we had in the east, that this is a teachable moment at all, and to what extent it might be?
So the question is, how about Hurricane Sandy? Was that a teachable moment? And if so, to what extent might we be able to take advantage of that? Well, that's what I thought about Katrina 7 years ago. And Ike. And Irene. Or was it Eileen? Irene last year. Well, I know it wasn't New York. Is this a teachable moment? Maybe. I keep hoping that these things are teachable moments. People keep asking me, at what point will we see evidence of climate change? No, really. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Who here was born after February of 1985? After February? You're such babies. After February of 1985. February of 1985, that's the last month that we had a monthly global average temperature below average. All of you who just raised your hands, you're in the new normal. You've never seen a below average year, a below average month. That's 27 years, almost 28 years ago. This year will set a record for the hottest year ever, breaking the record of 1998. We got hurricanes, when I left the edge of Empire where I lived yesterday, it was 30 degrees and the wilderness was on fire. It's October 31st, or November 1st, or whatever it was yesterday. Seems especially appropriate. I'm doing this right after Halloween, and right before Guy Fawkes Day. Remember, the 5th of November. The forest is on fire, it's November. That's not supposed to happen. We get 16 inches of average precipitation where I live, average annual precipitation, 16 inches. And the last decent rainstorm was September 24th, 2010. And it's rained almost 15 inches since September 24th, 2010. The drought stopped. The drought in the center of the country, it only ran between 2008 and 2012, I think. Right? Or was it 2004, 2008? I can't remember. It hasn't rained since then. So nobody knows what to call it. It's not a drought, though. This is we are seeing climate change. It's everywhere. And the denial continues. Nobody cares. It's not as important as the economy. That's what I hear all the time. When everybody gets rich enough, then we'll deal with, really? So you think the environment is less important than the economy? Try holding your breath while you count your money. Yeah. I tell that in Michigan, and they just take out their wallet, put it back, and say, what else you got? Nobody has any money left. Yeah, they're in the back. Right, so the point is that I could do this because I'm uber wealthy, college professor. And other people who are poor are in a situation, so they have to put their economy first. 1 mile away from me, at the end of the road, there's an African village. They don't call themselves an African village, but for all practical purposes, when I think of African village, here's what I think about. I think about 13 people sharing, say, 19 acres with a well in the center of the property. It's the only source of water. And everybody carries water every day to their off-grid home that they built themselves by hand. And I think of those 13 people growing all their own food and choosing to live in dire financial poverty. Choosing to live that way. They could live that way anywhere they wanted in this country and probably in many other countries. And they choose to live there because they love that place. You don't have to have a lot of money to make this work. I'm unconvinced of that argument. I was convinced of that argument until I got to know the neighbors quite well. The neighbors are amazing. Every Sunday night is a potluck. Every Monday night is a sing-along. I threatened to go to that once, and they said they'd never feed me again. So they have good taste too, apparently. Yeah. Oh, no, of course it's not possible on a massive scale. No, we can't have 7 billion people living off the grid. For one thing, if we have 700 people living like that, the whole system falls apart. Right? Or something like that. No, so will that work at scale? No, there's a whole bunch of things that don't work at scale that we should be doing anyway. Occupy doesn't work at scale. But it works. It works for where I encourage every act of resistance. Resistance is a moral imperative. Even if it's too late, especially if it's too late, then what do we got to lose? Resistance is fertile. And you know that line that came from, resistance is futile, from Star Trek, right? They just kept saying it over and over again, the Borg, resistance is futile. Guess what? The good guys won. Because they resisted. Turns out resistance is fertile. You get the wrong seed planted in your brain. So any act of resistance is a great idea. Let's start by destroying this unbelievably, irredeemably corrupt system called the industrial economy. If anybody needs the number of Homeland Security, I'm sure they'll want to know about this. Like they don't know. Yeah. Right. So I have two responses to that. First of all, resistance against the dominant paradigm is what got us out of the Vietnam War and gave us the environmental legislation and the civil rights legislation that became the envy of the industrialized world. But I certainly agree that no revolution has worked so far. And if that isn't a good enough reason to have a revolution, I don't know what the hell is. Well, okay, so let's forget civilized history, which is the only history any of us know, because that's the only history that gets written down. So let's forget the last few thousand years, and instead focus on, say, the first 2 million years of the human experience, when we lived very differently. When we lived in small groups, practicing a gift economy, living in anarchy, tribally. 2 million years that worked. And by the way, upon the collapse of a few civilizations, people went back to that way of living. The survivors, near where I live, the Membrys culture was there for several thousand years, probably about 10,000 years. And then 884 years ago, the Membrys discovered corn. A cheap energy source was introduced to the Membrys culture for the first time ever. 884 years ago. 864 years ago, exactly 20 years after corn was introduced to the Membrys culture collapsed catastrophically, and a few survivors walked away. Everybody else died. They had gone into huge population overshoot locally. They'd come to be dependent upon this food source that they could store and keep year-round until there was a series of dry years. And they ate the seed corn, and then most of them died. But they didn't go back to a civilized set of living arrangements. They didn't go back to growing corn. They went back to a tribal set of living arrangements. And there are numerous other examples of that through history. Daniel Quinn points out many of them in his book, Beyond Civilization. So I think we need to go back further than the French Revolution, which is when most people think the whole revolutionary thing started. And so let's just go back 10,000 years to start. But, I'm completely on board with you. Yeah, it hasn't been working. this is not working. What we're doing now is not working. Let's do something different. And I would encourage doing everything different. Let's throw everything at it. Maybe something will work.
Mm.
The community here has embarked on a 25-year vision plan, and I was wondering, in addition to things like improved public transportation, affordable housing, what other options might you suggest we put in the vision?
Humans throughout history have needed four things to thrive. Not survive, not merely survive, but to thrive. They need clean water and healthy food and some ability to maintain a decent body temperature, say 98.6 degrees, and having a decent human community to be a part of. So, if Louisville is going to be around in 25 years, and it would surprise me, it will be because they have managed to secure the water and the food for the people. And water is primary, obviously. And if you're relying on fossil fuels for delivering your water through the taps, when the industrial economy collapses, that's not going to work well. So if you're committed to Louisville for the next 2 decades, I would encourage you to harass the people who run this place into getting solar and wind so that the water goes up into water towers and then uses gravity to deliver them through the taps as a start. Yes?
Isn't it true that human population before the agricultural revolution came near extinction, like being underneath population 2,000 humans on the whole planet twice before? And didn't we somehow come back from that? So last night we saw Christopher Martinson talking about exponential growth, and I think human interest in things can also grow exponentially. And maybe what you're seeing here is sort of that minute before the stadium fills up. I don't know if anyone's seen that. Justin, you saw it last night. I don't know if you guys have seen his crash course, but he says that a minute before the stadium fills up with water, that exponential growth, the whole thing will fill up. So, but isn't this possibly? I mean, because I like your message, but
Oh yeah, I love it.
Let's say I like appreciate your candor. Although I do reject it utterly, because I think that humans have this other kind of really. I mean, I've seen a lot. I mean, I was good at the Bronx, and I've seen people do anything they can to survive. And I have a feeling that this could just be that tipping point.
Well, it could be. I know of one other case in human history where the number of breeding pairs, which is what we call other animals, the number of breeding pairs was in the neighborhood of 1,000 or so. And we came back. But guess what? In the last 3 million years, we haven't had an open Arctic Ocean. This time is different. The world is different already, and we're only getting started on the climate change front than it's ever been in the history of the human experience. Are we ingenious? Of course. Are we incredibly resilient? Too clever by half, I'd say. Maybe even, to quote Craig Dilworth's eponymous book, too smart for our own good. So it could be that we'll find a way through. I hope so. It's not like I'm, hoping. Gee, if I really want to be right, so I want everybody to be dead by 2047. It's not my goal here. So it could be that we'll be ingenious, but we better start applying some of that ingenuity with respect to the huge predicaments we face. And I don't see any leadership on climate change or energy decline, economic collapse, cancer clusters in towns, on and on and on. So let's go if we're so darn smart. Yeah.
You mentioned the word pride, and it kind of connected in my mind. Are you aware of Procter & Gamble's pride movement, the emerging technology and so forth?
Yeah, peripherally, sort of only marginally. Mostly comments I read about it. I haven't seen the movie.
And then there was the other side, Pest Wiki, curing systems and cracks and potential other technology.
I'm sure Chris Martinson pointed out last night that technology is not energy. And energy is not technology. And we can't rely on technology to solve all of our...
Well, this may be revolutionary. Could be another whole new kind of thing.
Well, maybe so. But we better start taking care of the living planet, which at this point we're trying our very, very hardest to kill every part of. The living planet has a spurting wound. And governments and central banks around the world are applying pressure on the heart to try to get the patient to come back. And they're buying saline and plasma from the corporations around there. And a dozen environmentalists are going around with Q-tips cleaning up the goddamn sidewalk. And nobody's getting to the point, which is that we're killing the living planet. So first, before we exert all kinds of cleverness and demonstrate that we can actually make iPads, let's fix the problem. Let's get radical, which means get to the root of. There's a reason that square root signal is called the radical. Let's get to the root of the problem, which is that we're killing everything we depend upon. And then let's think about iPads. And pardon my French. Yeah.
Forgive me if I'm not quite understanding your message, but it sounds like you're saying that in order to save the planet, the first step we need to look at is economic collapse.
Yes, you got it exactly. Why aren't you up here with the microphone? It only took you like 20 seconds.
In doing so, in the collapse of the economy, are we also supposed to ignore the progress we've made in medical and other such areas?
No, I don't want to throw out germ theory.
How do you,
I like germ theory.
how do you compromise with it? Because they are tied into it.
Yes. Yes, they are. And in fact, economic collapse probably means the near-term death of most of the people in the United States and in the other industrialized countries, because we have come to depend upon the system that pushes water through the taps. And in fact, most people will defend it, right? So if you think your water comes from the tap, you will defend to the death the system that allows water to come from the tap. When you realize that the water comes from a land base, then maybe you'll defend to the death that land base that actually provides the water. But I don't think very many people, not very many people in this country, not very many people in Western Europe and Japan, are going to ever reach that realization. So what to do about that? I don't know. But the living planet is primary. We cannot persist without it. That is the most important thing if we want to have human beings on this planet in 20 or 30 years.
Any comments about our search for life on other planets?
I'm still searching for intelligent life on this planet.
Aren't we going to colonize Mars before this problem hits?
Has anybody read any Ray Bradbury? The Martian Chronicles? That worked out nicely. I mean, really? Earth first. We'll mine the rest of the planets later? You know, I hear about getting energy from asteroids. Think about the energy return on that for a minute. No, I think this is, I think we might want to learn to live here. In this most amazing of places. Are you kidding? You couldn't have designed this much better. It's amazing.
Do you support what Russ George just did as far as dumping copper in the ocean? Geoengineering.
No, I don't.
You don't support that kind of thing?
No. No. It's looking for yet another technological fix to a dilemma produced by technology. So we're trying to apply technology to fix technological disaster. So there's a lot of people who propose geoengineering to fix our climate predicament. First, let's try not screwing it up so badly. Can we first just try that before we just assume that there's a techno fix out there?
Well, not to get into the technology too much, but as I understand it, there's a biomimicry principle that there's a phi ratio principle in development engineering that can improve water quality by mixing water with a huge amount of energy involved in that. So by studying nature, we're finding these principles that could be integrated and that's new technology.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not inherently opposed to technology, but I don't think we should, as our first response, turn to technology to fix these dire predicaments we've created for ourselves. That seems counterproductive to me. Are some technologies appropriate to use? Well, right now I'm kind of appreciating the microphone. Smoke them while you got them, right? But what I question is the turn to technology first, every time, instead of turning to changes in human behavior. As if we're incapable of living differently than this.
Guy, Malcolm, in that article, Malcolm Light, at the end talks about kind of like, well, in this particular case with the methane hydrates, we've got such a short time window, and if things head south, and then, if we have this massive 50 gigaton release of methane in the Arctic, then game over. So in this case, we need to rapidly scale up geoengineering in that particular case just to buy us some time to get our heads out of our butt. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the question is, Malcolm Light proposes in his February 9th, 2012 article that we actually use geoengineering because otherwise we're totally screwed, and use it right now.
On that particular issue, yeah.
Right, on that particular issue, in that case, at this point in time. And I've written about this actually, and I'm pretty sure we'd screw it up. It's hard for me to imagine a situation in which we would get it just right. We need to geoengineer, we need to add this much sulfate to the atmosphere, but not a little bit more, not a little bit less. I can't imagine we'd get that right. Come on, are you kidding? We fucked up everything so far. Really? I mean, haven't we? I mean, except for smartphones. So I don't know the answer to that. It is apparent that it is not gaining traction with the individuals who would need to support it. So there's no Bill Gates and Barack Obama and nobody I know of who has money or power is stepping forward and saying, "Yeah, Malcolm, that's a great idea. Let's do that." So,
But
whether we think it's a good idea or not, I don't think it's going to happen. And I don't think it's a good idea based on its merits, what I've seen so far. But I haven't given it a huge amount of thought because my first response to all that stuff is, let's just stop messing with it so far. First, do no harm. I think I've heard that somewhere. Surely we're running out of time.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
So, do you think the leadership of the country, for instance, do they just not know this? All the things you presented here are things that are in the public sphere. So you think people in leadership positions, president and so forth, would know all that? And if they know all that, why would they do nothing about it? Why don't we see some response? Is there some plan going on somewhere where someone's trying to figure this out? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
You're not going to get me to say New World Order. I don't care how you phrase it.
It's just a basic self-preservation perspective.
Right.
Wouldn't you see some sort of effort?
Maybe.
Do they not know? They don't know.
Oh, of course they know. Van Jones gave a speech. Van Jones was mentioned earlier today. He was Barack Obama's green job czar for the 15 minutes he claimed to care about that. And Van Jones gave a speech September 1st, 2007. And he said, I'm paraphrasing. I've been to Davos, and I've sat with Bill Clinton, and I've sat with Bill Gates, and I've talked about these issues with them. And you think they haven't put peak oil into Google? You think they don't know what's going on in the world? They know. They know. And they're just trying to get through the day, just like all the rest of us. Here's the great line. He says, they're juggling chickens and chainsaws, trying to keep the system to hold together for another day. Juggling chickens and chainsaws. That's what Van Jones said. That sounds about right. I think that they do know, but they were born into captivity, like all the rest of us. Born into this set of living arrangements, and they have come to think that this set of living arrangements is the only way to live. So they're trying to maintain civilization even though it's killing us. That's my guess. That assumes that those are the people who are actually in charge. Right? That it's not Goldman Sachs. It's actually running the gears of the administration. It was astonishing to me that in Manhattan the night before last, there was one building that had lights on. It wasn't the hospital. It was Goldman Sachs. Lights on all night. The only building in Manhattan. The hospital has to evacuate everybody, but Goldman Sachs, they're still working there because money doesn't sleep. So I don't know really the answer to your question, but I think I've danced around it nicely, and it's pretty impressive on myself.
What exactly is the message to this particular group of people then? It's kind of, you mentioned first steps, and I have my own first step, and that's to like be in education and to push sustainability in a sort of logarithmic fashion. But what is your message to this group? It seems sort of nice. And I totally reject that. It's always an insult. Because we're not institution of higher learning. We're here to make progress. And I don't care what direction you go, but have a direction. So what's your message to this group here in particular? Just kind of curious.
Christopher Hitchens wrote in his book, Letters to a Young Contrarian. To be contrary is not to be a nihilist, and there is no easy and charted way to make a living at it. It is something you are, not something you do. I recognize that the choices I made are counter to what most people would make, and the message that I'm trying to get across is difficult to swallow. I'm suggesting that we do everything except what we're doing now. Resistance is a moral imperative. Living differently than this culture pushes us to live is a great idea, no matter which direction that takes you. For me, that means one thing: living in a way that makes all of my former colleagues and immediate family members think I'm absolutely insane. The rumor is that I have this rare brain disease. No, there's this whole story, because academics have to provide a mechanism, right? Clearly I'm crazy because I left the job for life. So they make up this story. I heard this from colleagues in another state. So somebody comes up and asks me, so what is it? What do you mean, what is it? What's the disease? What are you talking about? You have this very rare brain disease. I've heard it from everybody. Really? I haven't heard it yet. Tell me more. So that's the story. I'm crazy. It's kind of funny because one of the speakers this morning was talking about the mental health consequences of climate change. And I'm thinking, yeah, I've been studying it for 30 years and I'm crazy. So, must be it. So my message is to stop doing this, to terminate the industrial economy, and from an individual perspective, to live as though the day were here, which is not nihilism. I used to live every day as if it were my last, but people got so tired of me running around going, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. So I don't do that anymore. No, but really, it's amazing that we're here, and I think we should acknowledge that and appreciate that gift, and not live every day as if it's our life. The best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago, and the next best time is today. I'm all about living for tomorrow, but I'm also all about living as though the day were here, because we don't know how long we have left. But let's do something about this omnicidal system that is killing everything. I mean, literally everything. 200 species a day, that's not enough for you? Imagine if you're walking to work every day, say you walk to, or bicycle to work every day, and every day you go past an old man, and the old man is killing 200 children. Every day he kills 200 children. And you think, well, he's old, so I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to call anybody, because probably nobody'd come anyway. Okay, now it's so much worse than that, because it's not 200 children, it's 200 species. And the old man is industrial civilization. And yeah, it's tottering and it's on its last legs. Let's push the damn thing over already. We got work to do. If we're going to save the salmon, never mind the polar bear. If we're going to save the bees, we got a lot of work to do. So let's get to work. Any question back there? You're just fidgeting. I do that. It's the only source of exercise I get. Right there.
Last question.
We just came out of the Sierra Club. The president of the Sierra Club was giving this 5 year. He was saying it's great. Everything's great because the United States has dropped their CO2 emissions. We are actually emitting less this year than we did 20 years ago. And that's great. Wind and solar. That's all going to save us.
Yeah. Right. So the point is, the president of the Sierra Club says it's all good, that the United States has actually reduced carbon emissions, which is true. In fact, what drove the price spike to $147.27 in July 2008 was not the United States. The United States hit peak demand for oil in 2005. Demand has been declining since then in the United States. We're not running this show anymore. China and India are running this show. China's consumption of oil has doubled in the last 10 years. So yes, in the United States, emissions are down because we're in a Great Depression, because nobody has a job, so they don't need to worry about driving to work. We aren't building anything anymore because there's no money for that. So of course our emissions are down. The economy's in the toilet. It's one step away from being over with. Let's push it. Work with me. Thank you all very much. Great speech.